I didn't find out my sister opened a business in my name because she confessed. I found out because my credit score dropped 147 points overnight. I was sitting in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, coffee still steaming on the table, when an alert flashed across my phone. New business account opened. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't signed anything. But when I logged into my credit monitoring app, I saw an LLC registered 3 months earlier under my full legal name, attached to my Social Security number, with 2 business credit cards already maxed out and a loan approval pending for just over $186,000. My hands didn't shake. I didn't panic. I just stared at the screen and reread the company name. It was hers. Not directly, of course. She was listed as operations manager. The registered owner was me. My date of birth, my address, my SSN, every detail correct. That was the moment I understood this wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. 3 months earlier, at a family barbecue, she had joked about how some people were too cautious to ever build real wealth. I remember her smiling when she said it, glancing at me like I was the punchline. I didn't react then, and I didn't react now. Instead, I opened the Secretary of State website and pulled the filing documents. Digital signature, time-stamped, submitted at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was at work during that time. Security badge logs would prove it. I checked the EIN registration, filed electronically. The IP address was partially masked, but not entirely. She thought she was careful. She wasn't careful enough. What unsettled me wasn't the money, it was the confidence. She truly believed I would either never notice or never fight back. By the time I finished reviewing the documents, I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to text her. I wasn't going to confront her at the next family dinner and create a scene she could twist into me being dramatic. Instead, I did something she would never expect. I said nothing. That afternoon, she actually called me, cheerful as ever, asking if I was doing okay and mentioning how busy she'd been launching a new project. I could hear the pride in her voice. I congratulated her. I asked polite questions. I let her talk. And while she described her hard work, I quietly opened a separate browser tab and downloaded every filing tied to that LLC. Articles of organization, operating agreement, loan pre-approval documents, vendor contracts. She had used my identity to build something she believed would make her successful, and she had no idea that every single document she filed created a trail. By the end of that call, I knew 2 things. First, she had already drawn over $42,000 from the business credit lines, and second, tax season was 8 weeks away. I didn't need to threaten her. I didn't need to expose her. I just needed to wait. The first thing I did wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. On Monday morning, before she even woke up, I requested a full IRS tax transcript and a wage and income report under my name. If she was running revenue through that LLC, it would eventually tie back to my Social Security number, and when it did, the liability wouldn't land on her doorstep, it would land on mine. That's what made this dangerous. Identity theft inside a family isn't just betrayal, it's calculated risk. She was gambling with my financial future because she believed blood ties meant silence. By noon, I had also pulled a complete credit report from all 3 bureaus and froze my personal credit. Not because I was panicking, but because I wanted a timestamp showing the exact day I discovered the fraud. Documentation is power. Emotion is weakness. I refused to give her the second one. Over the next few days, I watched the business activity carefully. 2 vendor payments cleared, 1 payroll transfer went out, not to employees, but to her personal checking account. She wasn't just operating the business, she was extracting from it. That detail mattered. It shifted this from reckless entrepreneurship to intentional fraud. On Wednesday evening, my parents invited both of us over for dinner. She arrived confident, dressed sharper than usual, talking about expansion plans. At one point, she laughed and said, "Some people are too scared to take risks. That's why they stay average." Our eyes met across the table. She had no idea I'd already downloaded every transaction ledger connected to that LLC. She thought I was still in the dark. I smiled and asked if she'd hired an accountant yet. She hesitated, just for half a second, then said she had everything handled. That hesitation told me she was filing nothing properly. No quarterly estimates, no payroll tax planning, no separation between business and personal withdrawals. She wasn't building a company. She was building exposure, and the more she moved money, the deeper she buried herself. That night, instead of confronting her, I created a separate encrypted folder on my laptop and labeled it simply Evidence. Inside it, I stored every document, every screenshot, every statement, every timestamp. I even requested the original digital signature certificate used during the LLC formation. When it arrived, the metadata showed the device type used to sign, not mine. I didn't need to accuse her. The data would do that for me. But I still didn't report anything. Not yet. Timing matters in situations like this. If I moved too early, she could dissolve the LLC, claim ignorance, spin the story into confusion. But if I waited until filings were due, until federal systems flagged inconsistencies, the case would no longer be a family dispute. It would become a compliance issue. And compliance issues trigger automatic reviews. 2 weeks later, a new alert hit my phone. Business loan funded. $186,000 deposited. That was the moment I realized she had fully committed. There was no turning back for her now. She wasn't testing the waters anymore. She was swimming in them, and she had just anchored the weight to her own ankle. I closed my phone, leaned back in my chair, and whispered something she couldn't hear. Okay. Because now it wasn't about proving she betrayed me. It was about letting the system notice. And the system always notices eventually. The loan funding changed everything, not emotionally, but strategically, because once that $186,000 hit the business account tied to my Social Security number, the clock officially started ticking toward mandatory reporting, and that's when I made my first move. Not against her, but with precision through the proper channels. I scheduled a consultation with a forensic accountant, not to confront her, but to understand exposure, civil liability, criminal thresholds, reporting triggers, audit probability. I didn't walk into that meeting angry. I walked in prepared. I handed over a folder containing the LLC filings, the EIN registration, transaction summaries, payroll transfers to her personal account, and the digital signature metadata. The accountant didn't even finish reviewing the first 10 pages before looking up at me and saying quietly, "You didn't sign any of this?" I shook my head. He nodded once and said, "Then this isn't just identity misuse. This is wire fraud exposure and tax fraud risk." Hearing it out loud didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me focused, because this was no longer about sibling rivalry or jealousy. This was federal territory. Over the next week, under professional guidance, I filed Form 14039, Identity Theft Affidavit, directly with the IRS. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just documented facts, attached evidence, and submitted it certified mail with return receipt requested. I also reported the fraudulent business accounts to the credit bureaus formally, but I did not request immediate closure. That part was intentional. Closing the accounts instantly would have reduced transactional visibility. Instead, I allowed them to remain active under dispute status, so monitoring systems would continue tracking activity. Every dollar she moved would now carry a risk flag. She had no idea. Meanwhile, she was expanding. Social media posts began appearing about her rapid growth. Photos of branded packaging, smiling selfies captioned, "Hard work pays off." I studied those posts carefully. In the background of one photo, I spotted stacks of inventory inside what looked like a rented warehouse unit. Another breadcrumb. I pulled commercial lease databases. The lease wasn't under her name. It wasn't under mine either. It was under the LLC, which meant the fraudulent entity had signed a binding property contract. That elevated the paper trail. I forwarded that lease copy to the accountant. He smiled slightly this time. "She's operational," he said. "That makes this cleaner." Cleaner. That word stuck with me, because the more she operated, the less this looked like confusion, and the more it looked like structured intent. Then tax season officially opened. 1099-K thresholds had recently changed, and payment processors were required to report lower transaction amounts than in previous years. If she processed enough revenue, and judging by inventory movement she was, third-party platforms would issue forms tied directly to my SSN. That was the trap she didn't know she'd stepped into. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after filing the affidavit, I received a certified envelope acknowledgement confirming my identity theft report had been logged and assigned a case number. Case number. That meant it entered a system, and systems create audits. I didn't tell her. I didn't warn her. At our next family gathering, she talked loudly about scaling operations and maybe hiring staff. She even joked about teaching me how to think bigger. I just nodded and asked how she planned to handle quarterly estimated tax payments. For the first time, her confidence flickered, just slightly. She said she had a plan. I knew she didn't, because if she did, she would have realized something crucial. Every revenue report, every payroll filing, every loan document was tied to me, and I had already formally declared them unauthorized. The machine was now running, and once federal systems start asking questions, they don't stop until they get answers. The first official crack in her confidence didn't come from me. It came from her bank. About 6 weeks after the loan was funded, I received a notification from one of the credit bureaus that the disputed business accounts had been placed under enhanced verification review. That's the polite way institutions say something doesn't add up. At the same time, payment processors connected to the LLC began sending automated compliance emails requesting identity confirmation documents. Normally, that would be routine, but because I had already filed an identity theft affidavit with an active IRS case number attached to my SSN, those verification requests didn't just sit in a queue, they triggered cross-checks, and cross-checks trigger freezes. 2 days later, I saw it. Business account temporarily restricted, pending documentation. She didn't call me immediately. She tried to fix it herself first. I know that because I received an automated notice that someone attempted to upload identification to verify ownership of the LLC, except the identification submitted didn't match the primary SSN holder on file. That mismatch is what escalated it. By Friday afternoon, the main operating account was fully frozen. No outgoing transfers, no inventory payments, no payroll withdrawals. The warehouse lease auto debit failed, late notices began stacking, and still I said nothing. That Sunday evening, my phone finally rang. Her voice wasn't confident anymore. It wasn't loud, it was tight. She said there must have been some kind of mistake with her bank and asked if I had received any strange mail about business tax forms. I told her calmly that I had received correspondence related to identity misuse and that I had filed the appropriate reports weeks ago. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then she asked what I meant by reports. I explained, still calm, that when I discovered an LLC and loan under my Social Security number that I did not authorize, I followed federal protocol. I didn't accuse her, I didn't threaten her, I just stated facts. She tried to pivot, saying maybe it was a misunderstanding or that perhaps I had forgotten signing something. That's when I mentioned the digital signature metadata, the IP logging, and the device mismatch already documented. Another silence, longer this time. What she didn't yet know was that lenders also perform internal fraud reviews once disputes hit federal databases. Loan funds tied to contested identities often become subject to clawback investigations, meaning if misrepresentation is confirmed, repayment acceleration clauses activate immediately. In simpler terms, the bank doesn't negotiate, they demand. Within days, I received confirmation that the lender had opened a formal fraud inquiry. They requested my affidavit copy and supporting documents, which I provided promptly. That same week, payment processors issued 1099 notifications tied to reported revenue under the LLC. But because the IRS case was active, those revenue reports were flagged for discrepancy review, and discrepancy reviews almost always mean audit pathways. She called again midweek, this time crying. Not apologizing, crying about how everything was falling apart and how she could lose everything. I listened quietly. She said she thought she could fix it before anyone noticed. That sentence told me everything. She didn't think it was harmless. She thought she could outpace detection. But financial systems are not emotional. They are procedural. Once documentation enters them, they follow rules. And rules don't care about family dinners or childhood memories. By the end of that week, the warehouse landlord filed a notice of default for unpaid lease obligations. Vendors began demanding payment. The business she built on my identity was collapsing under administrative pressure, not because I attacked it, but because I stepped aside and let compliance mechanisms activate. I didn't ruin her company. Paperwork did, and the IRS hadn't even reached the final stage yet. By the time the IRS finally contacted her directly, the outcome was inevitable. She was trapped in a system she thought she could manipulate. The first official notice arrived at the business mailing address, an audit notification requesting verification of all income, expenses, and payroll filings for the LLC tied to my Social Security number. She called me in a panic, voice shaking, demanding to know why they were after her. I stayed calm, replying only that all the information she submitted would be verified according to federal records, which was true and completely under my control, since I had documented everything meticulously weeks before. I watched as the reality hit her. The loan she had spent, the credit cards she had maxed, and the payroll transfers she had diverted were all now under federal scrutiny. She had ignored every minor red flag, believing familial ties provided immunity, and that arrogance had become her downfall. Over the next few days, her phone calls grew desperate. She reached out to our parents, claiming confusion, blaming her accountant, even asking for money to cover obligations that were now frozen and under dispute. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The system, the documentation, and the legal protocols I had set in motion were doing all the work. Within 2 weeks, the lender issued a demand for repayment, and the business accounts were permanently suspended pending resolution. Vendors stopped shipments, payroll bounced, even her so-called expansion plans crumbled under operational paralysis. She finally understood that she had underestimated me not as a sister, but as a documented, prepared, and patient executor of justice. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need revenge theatrics. I had allowed calculated silence, legal procedures, and the IRS system to orchestrate the consequences of her actions. In the end, she realized that every dollar she had taken, every signature she had forged, and every step she thought was clever was now traceable, accountable, and irrevocably linked to her own miscalculations. Our family gathered again, and this time, she avoided eye contact. She had built her empire on my identity, yet she was powerless to protect it. I didn't gloat. I didn't confront. I simply reminded her quietly that identity, documentation, and patience matter more than bravado. She had learned, in the most devastating way possible, that financial karma doesn't need dramatic speeches or public humiliation. It just needs facts, procedure, and timing. And as she sat there, watching the collapse she had caused with her own hands, I realized something crucial. True power doesn't scream. It waits. It records, and it lets the consequences fall naturally, as they always do when the law and careful preparation align perfectly. From that moment on, she never touched my affairs again, never questioned my methods, and never doubted that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one orchestrating the loudest justice.